This one has stuck with me for years, and honestly, it still creeps me out whenever I think about it. It didn't happen to me directly. It happened to my mom and my aunt. But the way it all played out has always made me feel uneasy. Like maybe there are things out there we really shouldn't mess with. So, to give you some background, my grandfather died when I was pretty young. I didn't know him well, but my mom and her sister obviously did. He had remarried after my grandmother passed, and let's just say, the relationship between his daughters and his new wife wasn't exactly warm. They weren't enemies or anything, but there was definitely tension there. When he passed away, his second wife was made the executor of his will. That meant she was the one in charge of handling all the legal stuff, making sure everything was divided the way he had instructed. At least, that's how it was supposed to go. But according to her, there really wasn't much left for my mom and aunt. She told them that most of his money and assets had either gone to pay off debts or just weren't there in the first place. My mom didn't push too hard on it. She's the kind of person who avoids conflict if she can. But my aunt wasn't in a great place financially at the time. She was really hoping her dad had left her something, even if it was small. The thought that his second wife might be lying or hiding something honestly ate away at her. Now here's where it gets weird. My mom and aunt, for reasons I'll never fully understand, decided to use a Ouija board to try to get answers. I don't know whose idea it was, but one evening the two of them sat down with this board. My mom told me she was hesitant, but my aunt was desperate. She wanted closure, if not money, at least the truth. They set it up, lit a candle, and started asking questions. At first it was the usual, "Is anyone there?" and all that. My mom swears she was barely touching the planchette, like just enough so it wouldn't fall off. And she knows her sister wasn't strong enough to push it around without her noticing. After a while they asked, "Dad, are you here?" The planchette moved to yes. Now I know some people will say that's just the ideomotor effect, your subconscious moving it without realizing. But the way my mom described it, she said it felt different, like the answers came quicker than her brain could process, almost as if she was just watching it happen. My aunt asked the big question, "Did you leave us money in your will?" The planchette slid across the board letter by letter until it spelled out 3 letters, an acronym for a bank neither of them had mentioned out loud. My mom said it was a bank she hadn't thought about in years, one her dad used when she was a teenager. Then it spelled out a string of numbers. At that point, my mom said she felt her whole body go cold. It wasn't random letters. It wasn't nonsense. It was structured, deliberate, like something was giving them specific information. When they finished, my mom wrote the letters and numbers down on a piece of paper. Both of them just kind of sat there staring at it, wondering if they were crazy. The next day, my aunt couldn't let it go. She actually went to the bank and asked about the account. And here's the part that gives me chills every single time I think about it. There was an account. The 3-letter acronym matched the bank exactly, and the numbers matched an active account under their father's name. And yes, there was money in it. Money that wasn't mentioned by the executor. Money that had been intended for his daughters. They had the proof. I asked my mom later how they even got access, because technically it should have been tied up legally. She said it wasn't easy, but once the bank confirmed the account, it created a paper trail. Eventually, lawyers got involved, and the second wife had no choice but to acknowledge it. My mom and aunt did end up getting what their dad had wanted them to have. But here's the thing, and this is why it freaks me out. Neither my mom nor my aunt had any knowledge of that account. They didn't even know it existed. The exact acronym and the account number came through that board, and it wasn't like some vague prediction you could twist to fit later. It was specific, verifiable information. Every time I think about it, I try to rationalize it. Like maybe my mom overheard her dad talking about that bank when she was younger and just forgot until that moment. And maybe subconsciously she spelled it out on the board without realizing. Maybe the numbers were a coincidence, maybe, but honestly, even she doesn't believe that. She said she was as shocked as anyone when the bank confirmed it. And the look on her face when she told me, I don't think she was making it up. The part that unsettles me most is the idea that something answered them. Whether it was really their dad or just something else pretending to be him, I don't know. But whatever it was, it gave them information they couldn't have known otherwise. And I think about that sometimes late at night. If the board really did connect them to him, then maybe the dead can reach back and help the living. But if it wasn't him, then who or what gave them those details? Either way, my mom never touched a Ouija board again after that. Neither did my aunt. They got what they wanted, but it scared them enough that they swore off it completely. And me? I don't think I could ever bring myself to use one. Not after hearing that story. Because whether you believe it or not, I've seen firsthand that sometimes those boards don't just give you random answers. Sometimes they give you things you can't explain. And once you open that door, you might not get to choose who or what walks through. This isn't something my mom ever talked about when I was growing up. In fact, she avoided the topic completely. For years, if my sister or I even mentioned Ouija boards, she'd shut it down immediately. Her reaction was so strong that we never really questioned it. We just knew it was one of those things you didn't joke about in front of her. It wasn't until much later, when I was older, that she finally told us why. And even then, it took years of convincing and the right moment for her to actually share the full story. She told me and my sister that when she was younger, I think maybe late teens or early 20s, she and 3 of her close friends got hold of a Ouija board. She never explained where it came from, just that one of the girls brought it over one night when they were hanging out. Now you have to understand something about my mom. She wasn't the type to scare easily. She wasn't into horror movies or ghost stories, but she also wasn't overly superstitious. At that time in her life, she just thought Ouija boards were some silly game. So when her friend pulled it out, she didn't have a reason to think twice. The 4 of them sat down, lit a couple of candles, and put their hands on the planchette. They asked the usual questions. Is anyone here? And what's your name? That kind of thing. At first, nothing happened. The planchette barely moved, and they were laughing, accusing each other of pushing it. But then, slowly, it started to respond. The letters it spelled out didn't make much sense at first. Random directions, numbers, little words here and there, until eventually it spelled something that none of them forgot. 4 till no more, that's what it said. Exactly like that. My mom told me they all looked at each other, confused. They tried asking it more questions, but after that the answers just went back to gibberish. So they shrugged it off, laughed about how creepy it sounded, and eventually packed the board away. She said none of them thought about it too much at the time. It was just a weird phrase, almost like a riddle. 4 till no more. It didn't mean anything to them. At least not then. But over the next month, things started happening. The first friend, the one who'd actually brought the board that night, lost her brother to an overdose. My mom said it came out of nowhere. He wasn't someone anyone suspected was using that heavily. But one night he just didn't wake up. Everyone was shocked, devastated. My mom went with her friend to the funeral. She said she remembered standing there listening to people talk about what a tragedy it was. And for some reason, that phrase from the board popped into her head again. 4 till no more. She pushed it away, told herself it was just her imagination. Then, not long after, the second friend's dad passed away suddenly. No long illness, no warning signs. He just collapsed one evening at home and didn't make it. 2 deaths. 2 of the 4 girls directly impacted within just weeks of each other. That's when my mom said she started to feel uneasy. She remembered the message, and she couldn't shake the idea that maybe it hadn't been nonsense after all. And then it happened to her. About a month after they'd first used the board, my mom and the 3rd remaining friend were in a car with another close friend of theirs. Not one of the 4 from that night, but someone they trusted, someone who was like family to them. They were driving late in the evening when the car lost control. My mom doesn't talk much about the crash itself, but she said it was bad. The driver didn't survive. My mom and her friend somehow did, but both of them were badly injured. My mom still has scars on her hand from the accident to this day. And here's where things get even darker. After the accident, my mom started having night terrors, not just bad dreams, but violent, terrifying episodes that would leave her waking up screaming, sometimes with marks on her body from thrashing around. She said the dreams were always the same. A dark figure, something evil, standing over her, watching her. Sometimes it would grab her. Sometimes it would whisper things she couldn't quite understand. It got so bad that my great-grandma, who was very spiritual, stepped in. She performed a cleansing ritual on my mom, something traditional she believed would drive away whatever darkness was following her, and according to my mom it worked, at least enough to ease the worst of it. But the night terrors never fully went away. Even now, all these years later, she still gets them sometimes. Not as often, but enough that they've become a part of her life she just accepts. She told us that for years, she couldn't even look at a Ouija board without feeling sick, and she never ever touched one again. What stuck with me the most, though, was how she ended the story. She looked at me and my sister dead serious and said, "Never play with one of those things. Ever. Don't even have one in your house." And the thing is, she wasn't trying to scare us. She wasn't dramatic about it. She just looked tired, like someone who had carried the weight of that memory for decades and was finally letting it out. She said that night, when the board spelled out 4 till no more, she never imagined it would mean what it did. 4 girls sat down to play. 1 month later, all 4 of them had lost something. One lost her brother, one lost her father, and my mom and the last friend lost their driver, who was like family to them. It was only afterwards that it clicked. 4 till no more. That phrase has haunted me ever since. I don't know if it was just coincidence, some awful string of tragedies that happened to line up with what the board said, but the timing, the wording, way it's hard to brush off, and the night terrors, the dark figure, that part chills me the most. Because even if you could argue the deaths were coincidence, how do you explain that? It took literal years to get her to tell us this story. And when she finally did, it was clear how much it had affected her. She didn't tell it like someone recalling an old scary story. She told it like someone reliving something that scarred them inside and out. I can tell you this much, my sister and I listened and we believed her. And we've never once touched a Ouija board, not out of curiosity, not even as a joke. After hearing what happened to her, we've never wanted to. This story goes back a long way, back to the early 80s. I was still pretty young then, maybe in my early 20s, and I remember it so clearly because it was one of those nights that just sticks in your head, not because of what we saw, but because of what we felt. I had this friend, Paul. He lived in an apartment complex, nothing fancy, just your standard 2-story building with a bunch of units lined up together. I used to go over there a lot just to hang out, listen to music, that sort of thing. Another one of our friends, Jim, lived in the same complex, only a couple buildings over. One evening, Paul and I decided to walk over to Jim's place. It wasn't far, just a short walk across the parking lot and through one of the paths between the buildings. The sun had already gone down, and it was one of those nights that felt a little too quiet. Not many people were outside, no kids playing, no cars pulling in or out. Just kind of still. As soon as we stepped into Jim's building, both Paul and I got this weird feeling. You know how sometimes you walk into a place and it just doesn't feel right? Like the air feels heavy? Or you get this pressure in your chest? That's exactly how it was. Neither of us said anything right away, but I could tell Paul felt it too. He kept glancing at me and I kept glancing at him. There was just something off about that place. When we got to Jim's apartment, he let us in and we sat around for a bit. That's when he told us that earlier that day, a group of people had been over messing around with a Ouija board. The moment he said that, it was like everything clicked into place. That heavy feeling Paul and I had, the uneasiness the second we walked in, it suddenly made sense now, I'll be honest. At that time in my life, I didn't know what to think about Ouija boards. I didn't go out of my way to mess with them, but I also didn't spend a lot of time worrying about them. But when Jim told us what had been going on in his apartment, it was like my gut instantly knew we needed to leave. I looked over at Paul, and he was already nodding, like he was thinking the exact same thing. We didn't make excuses, we didn't try to play it off, then we just got up and said we were heading out. The second we stepped back outside, that uneasy feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. It felt like something had followed us out of the apartment. At first we just walked, trying to act normal, but both of us kept looking over our shoulders. There was nothing there. No footsteps, no shadows, nothing out of the ordinary, but it felt like eyes were on us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and Paul suddenly whispered, "Do you feel that?" I didn't even answer. I just nodded, because I knew exactly what he meant. We picked up our pace, walking faster down the path toward his building. But the faster we walked, the stronger that feeling got. Like whatever it was keeping up with us. By the time we reached the parking lot, it wasn't just uneasiness anymore. It was fear. Real, cold fear. I can't explain it any better than this. It felt like something was right behind us, just a step or two away, and if we didn't get inside, something bad was going to happen. That's when we both broke into a run. We tore across the lot, sprinting toward his apartment, not daring to look back. My chest was pounding, but I didn't stop. Neither of us said a word. We just ran. We got to his door, fumbled with the lock, and as soon as we were inside, we slammed it shut and locked it. The two of us just stood there, breathing hard, listening. There was nothing. No footsteps, no banging on the door, no sounds outside. But that presence, it lingered. For a while, it felt like something was standing just on the other side of the door, waiting. We didn't see anything that night. No shadow, no figure, nothing we could point to and say that's what it was. But both of us knew something had followed us. I can't explain how we knew, only that we both felt it. And it wasn't the kind of thing you could just brush off. It wasn't nerves, it wasn't paranoia. It was something real. For the rest of the night, we didn't leave his apartment. We just sat there, lights on, talking about what we'd felt. Neither of us wanted to admit how shaken we were, but it was obvious. The next day, in the daylight, it was easier to laugh it off, to tell ourselves we'd overreacted. But even now, all these years later, I remember that night. And I know it wasn't just in our heads. I think about it sometimes, whether it was something that came through when those people were playing with the board, or whether it was something that had been in that place all along, just waiting for an opening. I don't know. All I know is that whatever followed us out of Jim's apartment that night wasn't friendly. It wanted us to know it was there. And I'm glad we trusted our instincts and ran, because I don't even want to imagine what might have happened if we hadn't. That night made me believe that Ouija boards aren't a game. People treat them like some party trick, but from what I saw, or more accurately, from what I felt, they open a door to something you don't really want to meet. And I'll tell you this, from that night on, I never touched one, never sat in on one, never even considered it. Once was enough for me. When I was a young teenager, I spent one summer doing something that, looking back, still makes me shake my head. My best friend and I got into using a Ouija board. We didn't go into it with any sense of fear or seriousness. For us, it was more of a game, something to do when we were bored. We called it surfing the board, like it was just some casual activity. Most of the time, we'd sit on the floor in her room or sometimes in my basement, put our fingers on the planchette and just start asking silly questions. Stuff like, what's my favorite color? Or who in class has a crush on me? Dumb things. And more often than not, the answers we got seemed to fit well enough to make us laugh and keep going. There was never any real consistency. We didn't feel like we were talking to anyone specific, and we never felt threatened. It was just harmless summer fun, at least that's how we saw it. But that changed one afternoon. And it changed in a way that I still can't explain. That day, the planchette started moving with a lot more confidence, like someone with a strong personality had taken over. The answers came quickly and they didn't feel random. This wasn't like the usual slow slide across the board where we'd both laugh and argue over who was pushing. This was different. Whoever or whatever we were speaking to identified himself as male. I asked for a name and he gave one. I don't remember it anymore, so it's been too many years. So for the sake of telling this story, I'll just call him Gordon. At first, Gordon wasn't threatening. He was commanding almost. He would tell us to do things. Nothing harmful, nothing outrageous, but things that felt oddly specific. Like take the poster off the wall or move that notebook to the desk. We actually did some of it, half joking, but there was this weird undercurrent to it. Even though it wasn't dangerous, it felt wrong. One thing about me is that I've always been curious, so I asked Gordon where he had lived before he became a spirit. Without hesitation, he spelled out an address in a small town not too far from where we lived. At the time, I had no idea if the place even existed. I didn't know the town well. But I had an old road map, and when I looked it up, sure enough, the address was real. That was the first time my stomach sank a little. I wanted to know more. So I convinced my older sister to drive me there. I was too young to drive myself, and when I asked my best friend if she wanted to come, she flat out refused. She was already spooked enough. But I couldn't let it go. So one afternoon, my sister and I drove out to the address Gordon had given. It was an ordinary-looking house in a quiet cul-de-sac, surrounded by trees. Nothing about it screamed haunted or unusual. Just a house tucked away in a neighborhood that felt peaceful. I walked up to the front door and knocked. No answer. I waited, knocked again. Still nothing. I wasn't ready to give up, so I tried the next-door neighbor. A man answered, maybe in his 50s or 60s, older than my parents, but not old in my eyes. He looked at me curiously, probably wondering why some teenager was standing on his porch. I asked him if he knew whether someone named Gordon had ever lived in the house next door. He paused. For a moment, his eyes went a little distant, like he was reaching back into memory. Then he nodded. Yeah, he said. There was someone named Gordon who lived there. I asked what had happened to him, and that's when things got strange. The man said Gordon had disappeared about 15 years earlier. Just vanished. No one knew why, no one knew where he went. He couldn't give me any details, just that Gordon had lived there. And then one day he was gone. I thanked him and left, my heart pounding the whole time. I couldn't wait to get home and tell my best friend what I'd found out. I couldn't wait to pull out the board again and see what Gordon would say. That night, when we sat down with the Ouija board, he came through immediately. No hesitation. It was Gordon, but this time something had shifted. He was more forceful than before. The planchette slid across the board fast and hard, spelling out instructions. He told us to do things again, but now the tone felt different, insistent, pushy. We went along for a little while, nervous but curious. He had us draw things, gather little objects, move things around. None of it was dangerous, none of it crossed the line into anything that seemed evil, but it didn't feel right. The energy in the room was tense, heavy. Finally, I asked him why. Why did he want us to do all of this? That's when the tone changed completely. Instead of an explanation, the board went wild. The answers got sharp, urgent. I felt the pressure of the planchette under my fingers like it wanted to rip across the letters. He kept demanding. More and more insistent, I told him no. I remember saying it out loud, even though you're not supposed to talk during the session. I said, no, we're not doing it. Why do you want it so badly? That's when he spelled out something I'll never forget. He told us that if we had done what he asked, he could have gotten us to trade places with him. Trade places. I didn't even fully understand what that meant, but my stomach turned cold. The way it came across, it wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't a joke. It was a threat. And then, letter by letter, the board spelled out this horrible laugh, over and over again like a chant. Ha 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 ha, repeating faster and faster. It felt mocking. I remember yanking my hands off the planchette and just staring at my friend. Her face was pale. She looked how I felt. That was the last time we ever touched a Ouija board. We packed it up, shoved it away, and we never brought it out again. That laugh. That demonic, mocking laugh. It stuck with us. To this day, I wish I could scrub that moment out of my memory. Poke my eyes out with a stick, never have to see it spelled out again, never have to feel the energy in that room again. We went from treating the board like a silly game to realizing in one terrifying moment that we were in way over our heads. And I'll tell you this. I've never touched a Ouija board since. It was the summer of 1997. I was 16. And like most teenagers back then, my weekends were spent with my closest friends, usually doing things we probably shouldn't have been doing. Drinking cheap beer we'd stolen from someone's older brother, smoking weed we barely knew how to roll, and just trying to stretch out the long summer nights so they felt endless. That particular Saturday night, we were all at my friend Amanda's house. Her dad was the cool dad, the kind who let us hang out in the basement, drink a little if we were responsible, and didn't ask too many questions as long as nobody puked on the carpet. Looking back, I don't think he ever suspected what we were actually up to in that basement. There were 8 of us that night. A mix of Amanda's close friends, my friends from school, and Ryan, who was kind of the class smartass, the kid who always cracked jokes at the worst possible times. At some point, someone pulled out a Ouija board. I don't remember who brought it, but the second it was on the table, the mood shifted. We all knew it was supposed to be creepy, but at that age it felt more like a rite of passage. Something you did just to say you did it. We split into groups of 4, taking turns while the others watched. At first it was lighthearted. The planchette spelled out random nonsense. Silly questions like who's going to marry Justin Timberlake? Or does Amanda's crush like her back? Got vague, jokey answers. We were laughing, drinking, and just trying to spook each other. But as the night wore on, the vibe started to change. It's hard to explain, but there was this heaviness in the room, like the air was thicker. The candles Amanda had lit around the room kept flickering in this strange way, even though the windows were open and the summer night was calm. I remember glancing over at Amanda's family VCR at one point and noticing the glowing red numbers on the display 2:22 a.m. for some reason that stuck in my mind, almost like my brain bookmarked that exact moment. It was right then that Ryan, who'd been making sarcastic comments the whole night, leaned forward with this mischievous grin. He asked the one question none of us really wanted to hear. All right, so, who in this room is going to be the first to die, and how? Immediately everyone groaned. We all said stuff like, dude, why would you ask that? But Ryan just laughed, waiting for the board to move. And then it did. The planchette slowly slid over to the letter U and stopped. There was this brief silence where we all just kind of looked at each other, waiting for Ryan to crack another joke. He chuckled, but I could tell even he was a little unsettled. Okay, how? He asked. This time the planchette moved with more force. Letter by letter it spelled out C-A-R-C-R-A-S. None of us waited for it to finish. Amanda shot up from her spot saying, okay, we're done. Game over. She flipped on the basement lights and blew out the candles. Her voice had that sharp edge of finality, the way someone sounds when they're trying to take back control of a situation that slipped too far. We all kind of laughed nervously, but the laughter didn't feel right. It was thin, forced. Ryan was the only one still sitting there, staring at the board with this weird faraway look on his face. For a second, I thought maybe I was just too high, but I wasn't. We'd all pretty much stopped smoking around 2 a.m. after things started getting strange. What I saw was real. Ryan looked gone, like he was staring through the board, not at it. He wasn't smirking anymore. His expression was blank, his eyes glazed. I remember feeling this chill crawl up my spine, even though the basement was warm from all of us packed in there. We ended up leaving the basement and going outside. It was a perfect summer night, the kind of night where the air feels soft, the grass cool under your skin. A few of us stretched out on the lawn looking up at the stars, trying to shake off the weird energy from inside. Somewhere in the quiet, Some of us fell asleep out there and the rest drifted back inside to crash on couches and beanbags. By morning, the whole thing felt distant, almost dreamlike. We didn't talk much about it, and Ryan brushed it off with jokes, though I couldn't shake the memory of that blank look he'd had. 3 months later, Ryan was dead. It happened on a Saturday night, just like the Ouija board had said. He was driving home from the movies with his girlfriend, who somehow survived. They were pulling out from a side road onto the highway near our high school when a semi came around the bend. Ryan must not have seen it, or maybe he thought he had more time. The truck hit his car. He died instantly. When I heard the news, my stomach dropped. I couldn't stop replaying that night in Amanda's basement. The board spelling out car crash. The way Ryan had just sat there afterwards, spaced out, like something had sunk its claws into him. Even now, decades later, it gives me chills. I've told myself over and over that it was just coincidence, just a dumb game mixed with teenage paranoia and the inevitability of tragedy, but I can't make myself fully believe that. Not when I was right there. Not when I saw Ryan's face. There were other strange things that night, too. The candles that wouldn't stay lit even though the house was still. The way the planchette had moved with this heavy certainty, unlike the random drifting it had done earlier. The way Ryan had laughed, but his eyes had gone completely blank. We never touched a Ouija board again after that. Not one of us. To this day, when I think about Ryan, I don't just remember the funny, cocky kid who always had a joke. I remember the way he looked in that moment after the board spelled out his fate. The silence in the basement, the weight in the air, the feeling that something bigger, darker had stepped into the room with us, and I'll never forget the sound of Amanda's voice when she shut the game down. There was fear in it, sure, but also something like recognition, like she knew we'd gone too far. I sometimes wonder if Ryan believed it, if in those last 3 months he carried that moment with him the way I did, if he thought about it when he got into that car, or maybe that's the real horror of it, maybe he didn't. Maybe he laughed it off, never realizing that some doors, once opened, don't close so easily. Even now, when I see a Ouija board, I feel that old heaviness pressing down. I've never touched one again. None of us have. But I'll tell you this. Every time I see 2:22 glowing on a digital clock, I feel my chest tighten. Because I'll always remember the night we thought we were just playing a game. And the night the game played us. This story isn't mine. It's something my grandmother went through when she was younger, but the way she told it to me always stuck in my head. I grew up hearing little bits and pieces of it over the years. And even though she wasn't someone who believed in ghosts or the supernatural, this was one of the few stories she swore was true. My grandmother was raised Catholic, but she wasn't what you'd call religious. She didn't go to church much, she didn't preach, and she definitely wasn't the type to warn you about demons or hellfire. If anything, she was pretty no-nonsense. So when she told me what happened, I believed her, because it wasn't in her nature to exaggerate or make things up. When she was a teenager, sometime in the 1950s, she and a few of her friends ended up playing with a Ouija board. Back then, it wasn't the kind of thing you could just order online or grab from a toy store shelf. It was more like a strange, forbidden novelty. Someone in her group had one and they were curious. She told me that the night they played started out just like you'd expect. Laughing, giggling, asking dumb questions about who they'd marry or if they'd ever be rich. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then the board spelled out something that silenced all of them. It said my grandmother was going to have a baby with blue hair and red eyes. She said everyone went quiet. At first they laughed, trying to make a joke out of it, but the words kept replaying in her mind. Blue hair and red eyes? It sounded impossible, almost ridiculous. But instead of brushing it off, she said she felt a jolt of fear run through her. It wasn't just the message, it was the way it felt when it spelled itself out. My grandmother told me she suddenly felt like she wanted to break whatever connection they'd just made. She grabbed the drinking glass they'd been using as the planchette and tried to smash it. She said she hit it against the floor and against the table, but it wouldn't break. No matter how hard she tried, the glass stayed perfectly intact. She said it was the strangest thing because it wasn't a heavy glass, it should have shattered instantly. That was the moment she realized something about what they were doing wasn't just a game. Eventually, they ended the session, put the board away, and tried to laugh it off. But the message stuck with her. She told me that for years afterwards she would think back to that night and wonder if it had meant anything. Fast forward a few years later. My grandmother got married young, as a lot of people did back then, and she had her first child. That was my uncle. Everything was normal, a healthy baby boy, nothing strange. But a couple years later she had her second child, a baby girl. When she saw her daughter for the first time, my grandmother said her breath caught in her throat. The baby had bright red hair and piercing blue eyes. Not literally red eyes like bloodshot or demonic, but the combination. Red hair and the kind of sharp blue eyes that almost seemed unnatural in a newborn. She remembered that night with the board instantly. The words came rushing back. A baby with blue hair and red eyes. She told me she stood there holding her daughter and felt this overwhelming sense of dread, even though she loved her immediately. She didn't say anything to anyone, though, not her husband, not her family. What could she say? That a parlor game had predicted her child? For a few months things were fine. The baby was happy and healthy. But when the little girl was around 4 months old, maybe closer to 6, she couldn't quite remember. The unthinkable happened. The baby died in her crib. Back then they called it cot death. Today we call it SIDS. There wasn't an explanation. There was no warning. She just didn't wake up one morning. My grandmother was devastated. She told me that grief is something that never truly leaves you. But what haunted her even more was the memory of the board. The prediction. The glass that wouldn't break. She didn't talk about it much even later in life. It was like she was scared of giving it power. But she admitted that after that she never went near anything supernatural again. She wanted no part of it. When she told me this story, I remember asking her if she thought the board had caused it. She shook her head and said, "I don't know. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't, but either way, some things you don't invite into your life." That's the kind of woman she was, practical, skeptical, but not willing to take chances, and that carried into how she raised her family. My mom and my uncles were never allowed near a Ouija board. She made it very clear that those things were not welcome in her house. I remember one time when I was a kid, one of my uncle's girlfriends bought me a Ouija board as a joke. I was maybe 10 or 11, and at first I thought it was the coolest gift. But when my grandmother saw it, she didn't laugh. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't even say much. She just picked it up, marched it outside to the bin, and set it on fire. I stood there watching, stunned. The girlfriend tried to protest, saying it was just a toy, but my grandmother wasn't hearing it. She just stood over the fire, watching until it burned down to ashes. That's when she finally turned to me and said, "Don't ever bring one of those into my house again. Some things you don't play with." The way she said it in that calm but final tone made me believe her completely. I never questioned it again. To this day, I've never touched a Ouija board. I've never even been tempted to. When people talk about them like they're just silly games, I think about my grandmother, the kind of person she was, and how seriously she took this one experience. I think about that strange prediction, the impossible description of a baby that somehow lined up with the daughter she lost, and I think about how she tried to smash that glass, desperate to break whatever thread she had tied herself to, only to find it wouldn't break. That image has always stuck with me. A teenager, scared and confused, trying to shatter a simple piece of glass, and realizing it was stronger than her. Almost like it was meant to last. I don't know what to believe. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe it was a cruel trick of fate. Or maybe there are things out there we aren't supposed to understand. Things that slip into our world when we open doors we don't know how to close. All I know is that my grandmother never touched a Ouija board again, and because of her, neither have I. This happened to me back in the 90s when I was in college. Before I start, I want to make something really clear, because I don't want anyone to take this the wrong way. I fully support abortion rights. I always have and I always will. What I'm about to share is just an experience I went through. It unsettled me at the time, and honestly it still does when I think about it now, but I don't see it as some kind of judgment or moral warning. It was just strange, and it's something that stuck with me. I lived in a small off-campus rental house with a couple of friends. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old place with creaky floors, drafty windows, and mismatched furniture we'd scavenged from thrift stores and relatives. We made it work, though. College is a weird mix of freedom and broke living, but those years were some of the most fun I ever had. One weekend, my closest friends and I decided to buy a Ouija board. It was half curiosity, half boredom. You've got to remember, this was before smartphones, before streaming. We'd hang out for hours just talking, drinking cheap beer, listening to CDs, and messing around with whatever seemed fun. The Ouija board felt like one of those silly things you try once, laugh about, and move on. The night we opened it, there were 4 of us sitting on the living room floor. We lit a couple candles, mostly for atmosphere, and started asking the usual dumb questions. Who's here with us? What's your name? Do you know the future? That kind of thing. At first it was harmless. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out vague answers. Sometimes it didn't move at all, and we'd tease each other about who was pushing it or not pushing it hard enough. None of us took it seriously. But after a while the answers started to feel more deliberate. I can't explain it better than that. It wasn't just random letters or silly replies. The tone of it shifted. At one point I asked what I thought was a straightforward question. How did you die? The planchette moved immediately. No hesitation. It spelled out MYMUMKILLEDME. The room went quiet. We all just looked at each other. Someone laughed nervously, but no one made a joke. It didn't feel funny. So I asked the next obvious question. Who is your mum? The planchette moved again, steady and clear, spelling out my name. I froze. Everyone looked at me, and I remember this weird wave of embarrassment washing over me, like I was suddenly the center of a joke I didn't get. My friends were trying to laugh it off, saying stuff like, "Ooh, guess you've got some dark secrets," but I just shook my head. At the time, it didn't make any sense. I wasn't even dating anyone seriously. I wasn't pregnant. Nothing in my life lined up with what the board was implying, so I brushed it off. It felt weird, but also impossible. Like, what was I supposed to do with that? Nothing, so I forgot about it. Life went on. Classes, late night studying, parties, all the usual chaos of college. I didn't think about that Ouija session again. Fast forward about 6 months. I found out I was pregnant. I'll spare the unnecessary details, but the timing wasn't right, and I knew without a doubt that I wasn't ready to be a parent. It was one of those decisions that was both extremely difficult and extremely clear at the same time. I chose to have an abortion. The procedure itself was straightforward. The clinic was kind, supportive, professional. I was grateful for that. I recovered, I moved on. At least I thought I had. It wasn't until a few months later that the memory came back to me. I don't even remember what triggered it. Maybe a conversation with a friend. Maybe something I read, but suddenly I remembered that night, sitting on the living room floor, asking that board how it died, and it spelling out my mum killed me. And then, when I asked who its mum was, it spelled my name. I just sat there, frozen, as all of it replayed in my mind. I want to be absolutely clear. I don't believe the board predicted my abortion. I don't believe it was some unborn child reaching out from beyond. I really don't. I think it's way more likely that it was coincidence or even one of my friends moving the planchette as a joke. But here's the thing. Once you've gone through something like that, the memory sticks to you in a different way. It's not logical. It's not about belief. It's about the feeling it leaves behind. And the feeling was unsettling. I told one friend about it years later. She remembered the night, remembered the board spelling my name, and she admitted that it was creepy as hell. But she also said that's just how those things work. They mess with your head. They make you see connections where there aren't any. She's probably right. But that doesn't erase the fact that the connection was there, and that it was personal. Looking back now, I think what scares me most isn't the idea that the board predicted anything. It's how easily the mind can tie things together, how one strange moment from your past can suddenly take on this huge, heavy meaning when life shifts in a certain direction. It also taught me something else. That night with the board when I asked, "Who is your mum?" and it spelled out my name, I didn't take it seriously. I brushed it off because it didn't make sense. But later, when life gave me an experience that could make sense of it, suddenly it had power. That's what I think Ouija boards really do. They don't necessarily tell the future or speak for spirits. They plant seeds. They give you something vague, strange, unsettling, and then your own life, your own mind fills in the blanks. Still, even knowing that, I can't fully shake the unease. Every once in a while, the memory will surface, and I'll get that same chill I felt sitting on the floor of my old college house. That same feeling of being stared at through the board, like something on the other side was smirking, waiting. I've never touched a Ouija board again, and I don't plan to.